In this video, we are going to look at constructors and this method called toString and the idea of static members. So a constructor is a special member of a class that is called at the time of object creation and only at that time. So for example, here we have this class student and we have an example of a constructor here. A constructor has the same name, here is the name, as the class name. So student is the class name, so the constructor name is student. And we can, and we need not, but we can have parameters. Here we have a parameter. So when we create a student, we will be getting the name of the student as a parameter, and we will be storing the student name in the name field. So a constructor looks somewhat like a method, but it doesn't have a return type. It cannot have a return type. It cannot have something that says return name, for example, or return one. There is no such concept. It can have parameters. It can have local variables. It has code just like methods. All those things are all right, but the name is always the name of the class and there is no return type. And this is called only when the object is created. So now, once you have a class like this, we can create a student object by writing new student. And now this constructor is going to get invoked and it requires a parameter. So you have to pass a string. So I give the student name as John, and that will be stored in the name field of the object. You cannot call this, you cannot instantiate this by writing new student. The constructor has to have that parameter passed to it. So see the difference between this and the previous statements where we created a student when we did not pass any parameters. When we don't have a constructor, the system provides a constructor for you. That is called the default constructor. It has no parameters. It does almost nothing. I don't want to say almost nothing, but I don't want to say nothing, but it is close to nothing. So this is no longer valid without a parameter. If you want to have the ability to call this without a parameter, then you have to put in one. You have to put in a constructor without parameters. Then we can create a student without passing any parameters. We can also create a student by passing the student name and student address. So I have 3 constructors in this. And one thing you should note here, when we have multiple constructors, it is advisable and common to use the most general constructor. In this case, the most general constructor is the one with the student name and student address in the other constructors. So when you create a student with student name and student address, both the student name and student address are stored in these 2 fields. But you can also create a student with just the name, in which case I don't have to repeat this code over here. Instead, you can call the other constructor with 2 parameters from here by writing this and putting parentheses and passing the parameters within the parentheses. So when I'm asked to create a student object with just the name, this constructor would simply instantiate the object through the second constructor here by passing the student name exactly and passing null for student address. So I don't have to repeat all this code over here. This helps because you have to debug a constructor only once. Any mistakes you can fix here and it will get fixed in the other constructor. So this is highly desirable. So a constructor is like a method. It has an access specifier like public or private, a name, parameters, and executable code. But it cannot have a return type, not even void. It has the same name as the class in which they are defined. And they are called when the object is created. You cannot simply call a constructor otherwise. The second concept in this video is related to a string representation of an object. Look at this method, public string toString. This is a special method in Java. In any class, it is possible and desirable to put a method called toString with two lowercase string with S capitalized, no parameters, returning a string. And here you can return any string you wish. This would be a string representation of the object. If you print the object, if you use system.out.println and print the object, this is what will get printed. Whatever this toString returns is what you will get printed. So this is highly useful for debugging purposes. The last concept in this video is related to static members. A static member is signified by putting the word static in front of it. For example, this minimum GPA is a field, double minimum GPA, it is private, but I also put the word static here, meaning this is a static field. Similarly here, these two methods, set minimum GPA and get minimum GPA, are also having this word static in front of them. So they are also static members. In fact, they are static methods. As there is only one instance of a static field for any class, whether there are no objects of that class, or whether there is one object or 100 objects or 1,000,000 objects, it doesn't matter. There is just one instance of this. So this can be used to share information across objects. For example, for a student, the minimum GPA is the same regardless of the major of the student. So we are saying for all students, minimum GPA is only one value. You don't have to store the minimum GPA separately for each student. It is not desirable either, because then we can get into inconsistencies. We want to have, for example, 2.0 as the minimum GPA for every student. So for that, we call this set minimum GPA, which takes a minimum value, new minimum value, and stores that into this field, minimum GPA. So it is called with the class name dot. It is not the object name, because you don't have to have an object to call this field, this method. So student dot set minimum GPA 2.0 calls the set minimum GPA a static method of the student class. Don't use an object here. I don't think it gives you a syntax error, but it conveys the wrong message. And you can find the minimum GPA by calling the method get minimum GPA on the class students. Now, the next topic is going to be somewhat new for many of you. So I'm going to use some extra tools for a whiteboard for talking about this. So that will be in the next video.